Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg and I am here to do my reading wrap up for the month of July and talk just a little bit broad strokes of my reading plans for August. We'll get to my reading plans for August a little bit later. I had a very productive July, like really productive. I read 13 books in the month of July. Some of them I finished just under the wire, some meaning 2. I finished 2 books the evening of July 31st, but that counts. So I have a lot to talk about just in terms of what I read in the month of July. Obviously, I've already talked about most of them, but the ones that I talked about in my last Friday Reads video, I didn't really spend much of any time on. So I'm going to backload this video a little bit. I'm going to try to run quickly through the books that I read in the earlier part of July to spend a little more time on the books that I read toward the end of the month that I haven't really talked about too much in a previous video. I hope that sounds fair. That's what I'm doing. So there's not much that you can do about it. But let's start with something that was a carryover from the month of June when I do my Pride reading. It's The Secret Life of Albert Entwistle by Matt Cain. Talked about this one a lot at the beginning of the month because Joel had finished it in June. So it was in our June reading wrap up. And then in the beginning of July, we did our best reads of 2022 so far together. And this really factored in for both of us. We both loved it. Part of that, admittedly, is that it really is a case of the right book at the right time. This deals with grief a little bit and moving on and creating your own life, and that is something we're both going through right now after losing Guinness. And it also is just a really cute story. It's kind of affirming, uplifting, and we loved all of that. So Albert Entwistle has been living a determinedly quiet life for many, many years. He works for the post office in the UK and he does not have any friends. People don't know anything about him. As he approaches his 65th birthday, he finds out that he is going to be forced into retirement, and without anything else to fill his time, he sort of has this existential crisis about what is he going to do. So he starts getting out a little more, opening up and talking to people. And he had a male lover when he was a teenager and they separated and never saw each other again. And he decides that he is going to track down that man. And that is sort of the impetus for a whole lot of change and him opening up and discovering that times have changed, but there's still a lot of work to be done and that there's value in living an open and honest life. And I just devoured this, loved it. I would absolutely recommend it to you. It's a really good book. I read the print book and Joel listened to the audio. Both were fantastic. Joel really recommends the audio. Joel, by the way, is unable to participate in my July reading wrap up. I had mentioned that I would try to get him to do it, work. So we will try to get him back at some point in August to catch up. But that was the very first book that I finished in the month of July. The next book that I finished was something that I had early access to on NetGalley. It's Now Is Not the Time to Panic by Kevin Wilson. I read this because I had heard a lot of really good things about Kevin Wilson's previous book, which was called Nothing to See Here, about a woman who becomes a sort of nanny to 2 children who burst into flames when they become emotional. I've heard really good things about that one. So I was kind of eager to try one of his books, and since this was available, I jumped in, didn't quite like it. I wouldn't say I didn't like it, but I will say it felt like an exercise where the book centers around a phrase that the main character creates with a friend of hers as a teenager in the early 1990s. And that phrase creates something of a panic, but that phrase is something that comes from Kevin Wilson's own life. So it feels like he took something that meant something to him and wrote an entire novel around it. And it's something that clearly means a lot to him, but doesn't really translate to the reader. At least it didn't for me. And the more the book had to deal with the phrase and the impact of it, the less interested I was in the book. In the early section of the book, I thought it was really interesting the way it introduced itself to this lonely teenager who is staring at a really boring, lonely summer, and then she meets a friend and they're sort of trying to figure out if they like each other, if they should be making out, and all of that stuff. And that part is really interesting and has some really wry, clever observations about life when you're trying to figure out who you are and what you want to do. And then it just becomes so much about this thing that I didn't find interesting and that I didn't believe as it blew up to become this huge thing. Like in the novel, it becomes so big that punk bands name themselves after elements of the phrase, and Urban Outfitters sells t-shirts that have the poster that they created with the phrase on it, and it's a lot, and I didn't quite believe it. So it's probably fine. If you're interested, if you've read Nothing to See Here, you might like it. I would probably recommend staying away, but it's a perfectly fine book, being honest. The next thing that I read in the month of July was Life Ceremony, Stories by Sayaka Murata and translated by Ginny Tapley Takemori. I read Convenience Store Woman a couple of years ago, like 2 or 3 years ago, and really liked it. It's a very quirky story about someone who doesn't really fit in with the norm, and that seems to be Sayaka Murata's thing. It really worked in Convenience Store Woman. I never read Earthlings, which was another novel that was translated after that, and these stories really go in very hard on the idea of how arbitrary taboos are, and after every single story, I just wanted to put the book down. But I didn't. I did finish it, but I found it a very frustrating reading experience because it felt like just the same outlandish thing after the same outlandish thing. So I didn't enjoy it all that much. The next thing that I read in July was Loveless by Alice Oseman. I had picked this up because in Montana Book Company's Reading Challenge for 2022, there is a prompt to read a book by an LGBTQIA+ author, and I tend to read a lot of books by people who fit the L, the G, and the T, lesbian, gay, and transgender, but I don't explore outside of that all that much. So, well, I mean, I do, just not anywhere near as much as those three. And those three I know would be really easy, like ridiculously easy for me to hit and check off the list. So I wanted to make it a bit of a challenge for myself and read something by an author who hits one of the smaller, less talked about parts of the acronym. And someone pointed out to me that Alice Oseman identifies as asexual. So Alice Oseman is mostly known for writing the Heartstopper books. We'll be talking about one of those later. But I figured Loveless would be a good way to go because not only is it by an author who identifies as asexual, but it is very much about a sort of coming of age, coming out story of someone who is asexual. And it's about her going to college and realizing that she is asexual and aromantic, and coming to terms with what that means for her because she's been raised on sort of Disney stories about the world and romance and all of that, and what will her life be if she doesn't have that for herself. So that seems to be the way to go. I will say I'm glad I did it for the representation, but I didn't quite like the execution of it. I didn't really meld with any of the characters, and it felt like everything took too long to happen. I felt like the book was way longer than it could have or should have been. In the beginning, it takes the protagonist too long to realize or identify herself as asexual and aromantic. Like, she keeps running into evidence and things that will define asexuality and aromanticism for her, and she never makes the connection for, I would say, too long. And I know that is how life works a lot of the time, but in a book, it just felt frustrating. And then the central conflict between her and her friends happens like halfway through the book, and then it takes way too long to resolve everything. Like, the second half of the book is all about resolving the problem that should have taken much less time. So I'm glad I did it for the representation, but I didn't like it as a reading experience, if that makes sense. The next book that I read in July is Our Colors by Gengoroh Tagame. I'm holding it upside down. There's something for the blooper reel. It's by Gengoroh Tagame, and it is translated by Anne Ishii. I'm a huge fan of My Brother's Husband, Volume 1 and 2, which I read a couple of years ago and just absolutely loved. As soon as I heard that he had released another book that was translated into English, I called Montana Book Company and ordered it, and here it is. I didn't like this as much as My Brother's Husband, but that's a really tough act to follow. This is a very sweet story of coming of age, coming out, mostly coming out. So the central teenager is struggling a little bit. He has this female friend that he's known since they were children. Everybody assumes that they're dating or that they're going to date and get married, but he knows that he is gay. He doesn't know what to do with any of these feelings. One day he leaves school and stumbles on this quiet, really not busy cafe near the high school that is run by this man. And he goes in and he discovers that this man is gay and living as an out gay man. And through coming to the cafe and having conversations and forming a bit of a friendship with this man, he develops the courage to tell his friend that he is gay and eventually come out. And it's a really cute story for that. There are like little things about the ending that I'm not so sure about. And I've talked about this in a Friday Reads video, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but the book describes him as having a synesthetic way of looking at the world, and that doesn't translate in the book because the book is all black and white. Like, he's supposed to really associate blues and reds, and when the book is entirely black and white, you don't really get that sense of that. But it is a manga, and I really enjoyed it. If you have not experimented with Gengoroh Tagame, I would recommend it. My Brother's Husband, Volume 1 and 2 are just absolutely fantastic, and this is a really cute story. He does a lot of erotic art in Japan. He's basically the Japanese Tom of Finland. So if that is not your thing, stick with these books and maybe don't look into his art any further than that. But if it is, hey, no judgment here. Next, I wanted to read something that would honor Disability Visibility Month, and I decided I could have gone a couple of different ways with it. I went with the audio of Deaf Utopia, a memoir and a love letter to a way of life by Nyle DiMarco. I realize it is a little bit odd to listen to an audio of a memoir of somebody who is deaf. This is the world we live in. And one thing I really liked about the audio experience of it is that there are passages in the book that would be reflected in sign language. For instance, when Nyle DiMarco was having a conversation in sign language with somebody else, or reflecting on a conversation he had with someone else that would have been in sign language. And the grammar is different in American Sign Language than it is in English. That's one of the things that's really interesting about the language. And this book and the audio keep that grammar intact. So you still get that sense of what the language is like, because Nyle DiMarco's whole point is ASL is beautiful. It should be allowed to be what it is. So it shouldn't have to conform to English. It should be its own language, and it should be recognized. So I really did appreciate that a lot. It is about his life growing up as the fourth generation of a family to be deaf. He grew up in a deaf family. ASL was his first language. But as he went to school, even in this era, people would try to force him to conform to the hearing world's guidelines and rituals. Like, he had teachers that did not know how to speak sign language. They just wanted everybody to read their lips and try to speak. And of course, lip reading is an unreliable thing in the first place, but I don't want to get too far into it. It's a really good and I think important book. I'm glad I did it for disability visibility, and I would recommend it. It's really interesting. If the fact that he is a winner of America's Next Top Model and Dancing with the Stars is the thing that's drawing you in, he does talk about the filming of those seasons. If you're looking for like gossip, you might get a little bit more about America's Next Top Model. He talks a lot more about America's Next Top Model as a show that told him that they were prepared to have a deaf contestant and then really didn't make enough accommodations for him. He had really just one interpreter, and there was a time when that interpreter needed to take a day off and they were supposed to have a replacement. The replacement didn't show up, so he just spent the entire photo shoot not knowing what was going on, and then the show edited all of that footage to create a very different storyline for what had happened to him, and of course one that did not make them look culpable for not having an interpreter for him. So there's a little bit of gossip about that. There's not as much gossip about Dancing with the Stars, which I don't really watch anyway, but it is interesting to hear how he learned to dance and use timing and rely on the timing and all of that. It's a really fascinating book because it also reflects on the experiences of his mother, who was deaf, and how it was for her to go to school, and his grandparents. And I really enjoyed it a lot, and I would recommend it to you as well, definitely to get a sense of what the world is like and maybe think about how closed off the world is to people with different experiences of the world. The next book that I read was very quick. It's The Hawk's Way, Encounters with Fierce Beauty by Cy Montgomery. This is by the woman who wrote The Soul of an Octopus, and I picked this up on the strength of that. And it does have the same sort of sensibility and the sense of empathy and compassion, and she writes very emotionally about these animals that she interacts with, and it's really beautiful. But since this is such a short book, I really wanted more, and I just didn't get it. So it's really great for what it is. I do feel like I wanted more, but it's fine. People have recommended that I should check out H is for Hawk if I want to do more about this subject matter, but I do have a copy of that, and I might get to it at some point, but I don't have any plans to do it really soon. So I liked it, but I would recommend Soul of an Octopus if you have not read Cy Montgomery's work before. That would definitely be a better starting point. Then I read Rick by Alex Gino. I listened to this on audio. It is a follow-up to Melissa, which was formerly named George. If you're unfamiliar, in Melissa, it is about a third grader who is struggling because she recognizes that she is a girl and she has chosen the name Melissa for herself, but everyone else, including her mother, knows her as a boy named George. And Melissa really wants to try out for the part of Charlotte in the school's production of Charlotte's Web, but everybody tells her, you can't try out for Charlotte, you're a boy. So it's about her trying to come out and get people to see her for who she is. It's a really cute, affirming story, and of course that means that it is one of the most challenged and banned books in the country right now. Rick is the follow-up to it. Rick is a minor character in Melissa. He is the best friend of the person at school who sort of bullies Melissa. And in this book, they are just starting junior high, and he is starting to think about who he is, take a bit of a longer look at his friend, and think about who he is, what he identifies as, and who he wants to be friends with and surround himself with. Melissa has gone to a different school in the years in between, and now they are in the same junior high again, and they do meet up. So Melissa does come back in a sort of smaller role. But it's a really interesting book, and I don't want to give too much away, because it's, again, a really cute, affirming story, and I would recommend it. But it is better representation of asexuality than I think Loveless was. And that's all I'll say. The next book that I read was Joe, an adaptation of Little Women, sort of, by Kathleen Gros. This was something that I talked about recently because when we were in Helena for Pride, we went on a mission because friends of ours needed books for a 13-year-old who is thinking that she might be a lesbian, but whose parents are not really on board with this. And we talked to Abby from Montana Book Company, and she had this recommendation, and it was absolutely perfect because it looks for all the world like a modern intermediate to YA adaptation of Little Women in graphic novel form. So really, how is a parent going to complain about that? But along the way, Joe in this version starts to think that she might be a lesbian. So it is kind of like a discrete LGBTQIA plus representation in it. I read it in a single afternoon, like an hour, 2 hours, which is not really an accomplishment. As I said, it straddles the cusp of like intermediate to young adult graphic novel. But it's a really cute book. I would recommend it. I would say if you're looking at it because of the Little Women aspect, it definitely adapts the story of Little Women for the future, and it nods to a lot of your favorite moments from Little Women, but it's not going to be repeating all of them. So you won't get a whole lot of Little Women representation as much as you might think you would. I mean, it's definitely there, obviously, but it's not there to do fan service. It's doing an updated version of the story, and I think it's really interesting what it does do. The next book was Kiss Her Once for Me by Alison Cochrun. I spent a lot of time talking about this in my last Friday Reads video with Joel because we both read it at the same time and finished it, and I'll put a link to that video down below because we talked a lot about it. I needed something sweet and romantic and light for my own mental health and emotional well-being, and Christmas in July is one of my favorite things. I just love Christmas, and since 2020 in particular, we have both been leaning into Christmas a lot. It's something that's really comforting. So the idea of a queer holiday romance in July really appealed to both of us. And what's interesting about it is that it really has complicated characters who are going through some stuff, learning to be with each other, essentially. The premise of it is that this woman has moved to Portland for her dream job. She meets a woman in Powell's. They have this magical day together, and then they separate. And a year later, she's lost her job. She's still thinking about that woman she had the one-night stand with. She doesn't know what to do. She agrees to fake marry a man who needs to be married in order to get an inheritance. It's a total romantic comedy trope, but it works because Alison Cochrun is a good writer. And when she gets to his family home for Christmas, it turns out his sister is the woman. So everything gets complicated from there. And Alison Cochrun really allows it to be complicated and tease out how difficult it is to form relationships and trust people and get over your emotional baggage and really process things that have happened to you. And I really deeply appreciate that about her work. So I would recommend it. And if you want more about this book, again, I will link the most recent Friday Reads video where we talked about it at length. That takes us to the 3 books that I have not really talked about in a Friday Reads video all that much. I've already talked for about 23 minutes, but there's just a lot of books to get through. So I'm not going to take a whole lot of time to talk about them, but I do want to give them just like a little bit more notice, especially Elena Knows by Claudia Piñeiro, translated by Francis Riddle, because I mentioned this in my last Friday Reads video because I had already finished it, but I didn't spend a lot of time talking about it. So if you are unfamiliar, this landed on my radar because it was longlisted and then shortlisted for the International Booker Prize, and it sounded really interesting. I started it earlier in July. It is about a woman named Elena, go figure. Her daughter was found dead, hung in a belfry of a church. That's really graphic, but I want you to know what you're in for if you're going to be picking up this book. So that is what has happened when the book starts. Elena has Parkinson's, and her daughter was her caretaker. So this is another thing I had kind of intentionally picked up because of Disability Awareness Month. Elena has a chronic illness, but it's a chronic illness that becomes a disability. So it kind of fits. She is really unable to get around. The book is structured around when she takes her medication so that she will be able to move around. And the book opens with her waiting for her medication to kick in so she can leave the house on one last mission. She does not believe that her daughter committed suicide. The police are convinced that that is exactly what happened. They won't believe her. They haven't been getting anywhere with an investigation. Elena isn't even really convinced that there is an investigation going on. So she is leaving the house to go on a sort of last-ditch mission to get someone to help her and maybe prove that what happened to her daughter is not what the police think it was. Because she's so unable to really get around at this point that she knows she can't really advocate for her daughter anymore, and she needs someone to help her. So it's a short book. I got a little more than halfway through, and I had a really bad day in a Friday Reads and talked about how I was struggling, sad, and all of that. And a couple of people recommended that I should put this book down. So I did. I took that advice, and I hadn't quite realized what this was doing to the headspace I was in, because this is a brutal book. It is like a bruise that just keeps getting poked. And because it's such a good book, I hadn't realized what it was doing. So I did put it down, and that's when I picked up Kiss Her Once for Me. And as soon as I was done with Kiss Her Once for Me, I picked this back up, and there were only 40 pages left. So I kind of tore through them in maybe even a single day. And I'm really glad that I picked it back up, but I'm also really glad I took that break, because this is, again, brutal. It's like just poking a bruise repeatedly. It is about a lot of different things. It's about a very complicated mother-daughter relationship, and in some ways that's a bit of a microcosm for relationships with other people. And it's about motherhood, it's about religion, it's about disability and illness and decline, and the desire to live against all odds, and how sometimes the world beats you down. It's about how impossible it is to really know anything, including another person and what their motivations are. And I can't really, in a video like this, spend a lot of time talking about what those things mean and how they come out of the text, because a lot of it happens in that last 40 pages. So you're gonna have to pick the book up and get through it if you can, despite all the triggers, to really experience all of that for yourself. I think it's a really beautiful and intelligent book. It is not an optimistic book at all. It does not give you much to feel comforted by, which is honest, but can also be very difficult, because this is a book that is very aware of the fact that happy endings are only temporary. Respites from stress are only temporary. There's always going to be something else coming down the line, and things always end. So again, it's a bit of a bleak book because of that, but it's a really beautiful and intelligent book, very sharp, and I'm glad I read it. I'm glad I took the break in the middle, but I'm really glad that I picked it up and finished it. I have not read the book that won the International Booker yet, but this, to me, was certainly a very strong contender, and I'm glad that it made the shortlist. It's a really beautiful book, and I would recommend it if you can get past all of those things. If you pick it up and you find yourself struggling, I do also recommend taking a break, like I did, because I didn't realize just how much... it's not the book's fault. I got depressed on my own about losing Guinness and all of that. So the book was just helping me spiral a little further. So I'm glad that I took a step back and then came back to it when I was ready, because it's beautiful. It's on my list of my top 20 books of the year so far. I can't remember where, but yeah, it's a great book. I'm glad that I went on that journey with it. I don't want to dissuade anybody from reading it, but I also really want to be honest about the experience of reading it, because it is a lot if you're going through some stuff right now, just so you know. And then this weekend, I had decided that I would pick up Heartstopper Volume 2 by Alice Oseman. We're back to her. So I read the first Heartstopper book, I think last year, and then I got a little annoyed because it ends a little bit abruptly. Like, clearly you are supposed to continue through the series pretty quickly. And at the time, there are, I think, 4, maybe 5 books out. So there is also a cost thing. Like, it's $15 times 5 books. So it is available online. But in the year since, I watched the TV show on Netflix. It's adorable. I loved it. And that really got me thinking, you know, I do want to finish the series. And print is going to be the easiest way to do it, even though it is available online. So I picked it back up, and it is all of the things that I said. It's adorable. It's total cinnamon bun, pure, wholesome energy. If you're unfamiliar, it's about these 2 teenagers, Charlie and Nick, who are at a school in the UK, and Charlie had been outed previously in the school as a gay teenager, and he got bullied very badly as a result of that. He is now coming out on the other side of that, but trauma from that experience stays with him. So when the Heartstopper series begins, Charlie is having this really unsatisfying relationship with another boy in the school who needs them to keep the relationship secret, and who kind of assists in bullying Charlie a little bit. Not actively, but psychologically. And won't recognize him, and is actually dating a woman, and is making Charlie feel awful. He is assigned to a new sort of like homeroom, I guess. I don't know how UK schools work. And he is partnered with Nick, who is on the rugby team, a year older than him. They form a friendship, and it's really difficult to talk about the first book without spoiling anything, because their friendship, Charlie develops a crush on Nick. He breaks it off with the other guy, but Nick is straight, and he doesn't know what to do about that, so he has all these feelings for Nick and doesn't know what to do. But you can see that Nick is sort of reassessing himself and appraising his relationship with Charlie and what he wants out of it. So the first volume ends with them kissing, and this picks up from there. And it's really cute. Alice Oseman is very good at these characters and these stories. It does feel like watching a single episode of a season of TV, Like, it's a really cute story, but you are very much aware of the fact that it is an installment of a larger story. It's not really contained. You know that it has already begun and is going to continue afterward. And I do still have a little bit of frustration with that because I'm not someone who wants to read 4 or 5 books by the same author in a row. I like to pick one up, do whatever else I want, and then come back. So it's really cute, it's enjoyable, but that part continues to frustrate me a little bit. I don't have volume 3, so I'm going to be forced to take a break anyway. I would have regardless. But when I have a copy of volume 3, I will pick it up. I read it in a single day. I could have read it in a single afternoon, but we had to stop because we did a Zoom with a friend. So really good book. At some point I'll do volume 3. I do have volume 4, but don't want to read that until I've done volume 3. So that is Heartstopper volume 2 by Alice Oseman. The final book that I read in the month of July, I finished it just before midnight last night actually, and I was listening to it on audio, but I wanted to get a copy of it. It's Less by Andrew Sean Greer, and I will be talking about this one a lot more in the future, so I won't spend a whole lot of time on this one. So this is a Pulitzer Prize winner for fiction. I had already read it, but I wanted to reread it. It is actually not the book that I had been planning to do next for my Pulitzer Prize project, but there is a sequel coming out in September called Less is Lost. So it felt like a good time to revisit Less and look ahead to the sequel, and I decided to do that. I am like an agent of chaos when it comes to making plans. I always allow for room to change my mind because I'm a mood reader, and I can't always plan what I'm going to be in the mood for once I finish what I'm currently reading. So that's why I always hesitate to really talk about what my next book is going to be for my Pulitzer Prize project, because it's changed multiple times in the past and will continue to do that in the future. So I did this. What I will say is interesting is that I feel like since 2018, when I read this, it's a funny story. I actually got this from the library the day it won the Pulitzer. So I have never felt so on the nose in my life because I had taken it home like an hour before it won the Pulitzer. I felt so fancy. And in the years since, my stance on this book has always been, it's a perfectly fine book that had no business winning a Pulitzer Prize. So as I was reading it, I started to think, oh, I think I appreciate this more the second time around. And then I finished it and I went to tell the Storygraph that I had finished it and realized I had posted a review of it in 2018 and I gave it 5 stars and wrote a glowing review of it. So we'll talk about whether or not I think it deserved to win the Pulitzer Prize still in my Pulitzer Prize deep dive. But it was really interesting because I think that's a lesson about how your opinion of something can change over time and you might not even realize it, and then you don't even remember what you thought of it the first time around. Because I was convinced that I was liking it more the second time around, and then I realized I actually liked it in the first place. It's just that since it is a Pulitzer winner, my position on the book sort of calcified into, it's a perfectly fine book that did not deserve to win the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. I'll spend more time talking about whether or not I think it is a worthy book for the Pulitzer in my deep dive to come. If you're unfamiliar, this is a book about Arthur Less. It is an unapologetically queer novel, which is kind of fun for a Pulitzer winner. He has basically coasted his whole life on a combination of luck and charm. He is approaching his 50th birthday. He's really worried about aging. He has not had a serious relationship. He's been sort of casually dating someone younger than him on the side, but that person is now getting married to someone else. Arthur is invited to the wedding. He does not want to go to the wedding, so he accepts a series of invitations to events, competitions, and teaching engagements, all sorts of things like that, all over, that will take him all over the world, so he will be anywhere other than at the wedding of this person he has been casually dating. And it will also distract him from his birthday because in the course of his travels, he will turn 50. So that's what it's about. I'll talk a lot more about it when I do my Pulitzer Prize deep dive. I'm already preparing for it, but I needed to have a physical copy because it was really annoying to try to take notes and get quotes from an audio. So I went to my local used bookstore and got this copy. So I will have a video coming at some point. In terms of what's coming up for August, I really want to get back to Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois, but I have a couple of things I want to get off of my plate first. One of them is going to be a surprise. I don't even know what it's going to be. Stay tuned. There will be more about that. August is Women in Translation month, so I am hoping that I will read The Queens of Sarmiento Park by Camila Sosa Vilada. This was the selection for the LGBTQ in Translation read-along. Actually, there are two selections for it, but this is the one that fits Women in Translation month. In the US, it is published as Bad Girls, but I ordered a copy from the UK. It doesn't have the name of the translator on the cover. Let me see if I can find it. Translated by Kit Maud. So I'm hoping I will read this in August for Women in Translation month. I have another option. I wanted to read There's No Such Thing as an Easy Job by Kikuko Tsumura for Women in Translation month last year. This one is translated by Polly Barton, and I didn't get to it. So I would love to get to it this year and just sort of circle back. But with this happening and wanting to get to Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois, this surprise project, I don't know if that will end up happening. So I need to get this surprise off my plate. Maybe I'll do Queens of Sarmiento Park after that, depending on how I'm feeling. And I also have some advanced NetGalley books that are coming out either in August or in September. So I want to try to get those done as well. And my reward for finishing all of those things will be that I can pick up the Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois again and finish it. That's my loose plan for August. If you have thoughts about any of the things that I read in July or any of the things that I said, recommendations, let me know in the comment section down below. I would love to hear what you have been up to in the month of July and what you plan to do in August, particularly if you have something that you are going to read for Women in Translation month. Let me know in the comment section down below. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.